Hello, you're listening to a new episode of Popcorn Podcast with Leigh and Tim, where we're reviewing The Colour Purple.
I'm Timmy Fland, movie buff.
And I'm Leigh Livingstone, entertainment journalist.
And we love to talk all things movies. Now, The Colour Purple is based on the Broadway musical adaptation of Steven Spielberg's 1985 film, which launched the film careers of Whoopi Goldberg and Oprah Winfrey. It follows Celie, who faces many hardships in her life, including an abusive husband, but with the support of sultry singer Shug Avery and stand her ground stepdaughter Sophia, Celie finds extraordinary strength in the unbreakable bonds of a new kind of sisterhood.
The Colour Purple is directed by Blitz Bazawule, who is a Ghanaian multimedia artist who directed Beyoncé's Black is King. The screenplay is by Marcus Gardley, who brought us The Maid.
The film stars an award-winning cast including Taraji P. Henson, Danielle Brooks, Coleman Domingo, Corey Hawkins, Halle Bailey, Ingenue Ellis-Taylor, and Grammy-winning artist Fantasia Barrino in her major motion picture debut.
Now, straight out of the gate, Tim, this is a musical, okay? I don't know if people realise that. There's lots of talk recently about how musical movies are marketing themselves or hiding the musical elements to try and get people in the cinema. This one, as we've said, is based on a Broadway musical, so it is out and out a musical.
Yes, 100%. It's very, very clear in the marketing for this one. Despite one of the bugbears I have just on this whole marketing piece that is top of mind. We've seen it with Mean Girls and also Wonka. People literally going in and being like, they're singing. I had no idea this was a musical.
Yeah.
I didn't sign up for this, or, oh, I'm pleasantly surprised. Whatever you feel in that space around musicals, it's not for everyone. But I have an issue with the fact that they just call these movies the same as their original. It's just called The Colour Purple. Why isn't it called The Colour Purple, the musical? Why isn't it called Mean Girls, the musical? It's just something little, but it just adds to the confusion from a marketing perspective in what the audiences may be expecting going into these films.
And it's not like they shy away from those addendums. You know, you've got like Mission Impossible, Dead Reckoning, and like all those...
Part one.
Part one, which they've dropped the part one now.
Have they? I didn't know that.
They have indeed, yes. So it'll be interesting to see what the second part's going to be called now.
Well, I'm kind of relieved because that title specifically was such a mouthful. Mission Impossible, Dead Reckoning, Part 1. So you have to take several breaths to get through that.
But my point is, it's not like Hollywood shies away from doing that. We've got upcoming Force of Nature, The Dry 2, things like that. They can absolutely add a musical. I mean, look at,
yes,
is it on the Disney Channel? High School Musical, the movie, the musical?
It's...
Is that what it is?
High School Musical, the series.
Yes, that's...
Yeah. That's ridiculous.
That's going a bit too far, obviously. But either way, they could add the musical onto the end of it. Also,
to add some sort of context to what this project is also aligned to. So not only the 1985 classic from Spielberg, that film was based on a novel that was published a few years prior in 1982 from Alice Walker, which was drawn from her own life. Now, that piece of work was awarded the Pulitzer Prize as well as the National Book Award for Fiction. So this story has been within our lives for more than 40 years. Yeah. So it's made quite a cultural impact over the decades. I have a confession to make, though. I'm not proud of this. I've never seen Spielberg's 1985 Oscar-nominated classic. Ugh.
Yeah, I can see the look on your face there. You were scared to say that. You must rectify that immediately. But just on your point before about Alice Walker, I also want to point out that she was the first Black woman to win the Pulitzer Prize for this novel.
Amazing.
So the book and the film, as you said, they're cornerstones of culture. And it almost raises the question, like, why now? Why again? We have the book, we have the original movie, you also have the Broadway musical, but why do it again when all of that was so pivotal?
Yes.
And I guess some would argue that it's perfect timing in this climate with the Me Too movement and women feeling more empowered to speak up and speak out against oppression and abuse. I mean, we've got a long way to go, especially with like victim shaming and things like that, but it's an opportune time to redo this film.
100%. And one of the things that I was experiencing while watching it, and certainly a takeaway from the movie, was that the importance that this film celebrates Black stories and the themes and complexities that come with that experience. I was so relieved at the lack of white people in this movie because it's not their story. I came in not really knowing much about it, and I was worried about its setting and my interpretation of it, that are there going to be white characters at the center of this somewhere peppered through? And they're not. And I was so happy about that because it is a story for the Black community through and through, end to end. There's only very, very minimal white people present in this film, which is a relief.
Yeah, and that feeds into the racism of the era. This is set in the early 21st century, late 20th century.
Yeah, so it starts in 1909, the film, the story.
Yeah, so of course the big thing around there in the American South is the rampant racism that was going on. So that you kind of have to touch on that a little bit. But through and through, this is an internal story. It's a coming of age journey for Celie.
You said it's an internal story, right? Which it absolutely is. And it touches on several main important themes that I think are important to discuss. I'll just list a few off. There's themes around racism, race, like you mentioned before. It talks about sexuality. I'd like to go into that a little in this episode as well, because I don't think it successfully explores that. And also the different kinds of violence, right, that the Black community, especially women, have to endure. So it absolutely doesn't shy away from big themes, big topics, but told with quite an intimate lens through the character of Celie and other players across the movie.
And when I say internal, I don't mean solo internal, like not just Celie. It's internal of a community.
Yes.
As you said, with all those themes going on. I had concerns about how they would turn such a serious film into a musical, because I haven't had the pleasure, unfortunately, of seeing the musical. I would absolutely love to. But from the first number in this film, I was utterly convinced. How did you feel when the first musical number kicked off?
See, this is the thing. It goes back to the celebration of Black culture and the community around praise and worship and their adoration for God, and how that peppers into their lives, how they interpret life and how they challenge their place in life. So I had not seen the original film, so I wasn't so in tune with the story, but I found the passage of music to be a really beautiful invitation for some joy to be put into a really harrowing story. So I found it really moving and impactful, the fact that it was a musical despite the story being utterly devastating for the most part.
Yeah, because it's quite a heavy story. There's no shying away from that.
Not at all.
Resilience is the magic word of this film. Resilience against adversity, poverty, racism, sexism, all those kind of things, survival and resilience. Basically Celie is abused and taken advantage of over 4 decades. It's heavy material in a coming of age casing. And I just thought, how do you make that into a light, airy musical? And they absolutely pulled it off, I think.
I mean, just on that, there are songs in this movie that are light and they're spectacular in how they're portrayed visually and the music itself. But within the strong themes, there are some exceptionally powerful ballads that help push the story, that inner turmoil and dialogue that the characters are dealing with as well. So I think tonally it's the perfect balance of using the medium of music within a story that has good and bad things to say about humanity.
And when you say musical, they're not singing all the way through it.
No.
It's a drama interspersed with musical numbers. Because sometimes you say musical and people think that people are going to be sing-talking all the way through it.
There's quite a lot of dialogue in this, and rightly so. I think it works. It's interesting to point out that piece because there are some original songs in this film that haven't been used in the 2005 and 2015 revival of the Broadway musical. So the musical itself's been around for almost 20 years itself, which is quite amazing.
Yeah. And so if you've seen the musical, you're going to get something new out of the film.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really important when you are telling the same story in a different way for arguably the third or fourth time or fifth, the book, the film, two iterations of the musical, and then now the movie musical based on the film, based on a book. So you have to keep it fresh for the audience, and also just contemporizing the story despite it being set, some 110 years ago or whatever. But there are 13 songs from the musical stage production that aren't in the film.
Yeah.
So it is on purpose, with intention, telling the story in a very, very different way that audiences who have seen the musical production, they're not in the movie.
Yeah.
So.
And some parts have been changed or streamlined because, as you said, they have to fit in these musical numbers and these new musical numbers. I felt the film went on a little long.
It was a long film.
This is going to be my little criticism. So it does go on a little long, and I started to wonder where they could have trimmed some things out. And everything that I came down on, I thought, I don't think you could, because it all speaks to Celie's growth over the decades.
Yeah.
There was a section in Shug Avery's house in Memphis. I thought, we didn't really need that because it was only a glance. It was only very brief, and then Celie was back to her hometown. And I thought, what was that little? But it spoke to her escaping. It spoke to her breaking free.
Yeah.
So you couldn't lose that. It was really hard. So what it boils down to is I did feel it was a little long, but I couldn't tell you what they should have got rid of.
I enjoyed the film very much. I did feel its length at parts, and it is hard to determine where they could have trimmed things, just like your experience. So I totally agree with you there. I feel like just on the themes, there's some deeply uncomfortable themes that we've talked about, but many of them are assumed or implied, others quite apparent, and in your face may be the wrong term to use, but they're front and center, right? And you have to deal with them as an audience because your characters are dealing with them head on. And we absolutely don't need performative abuse or on film or overtly sensual love affairs if it's not needed. But it did leave some gaps in the plot for me, and some like the overall flow of the film. One of the things I kind of alluded to earlier was around there's themes around sexuality and fluid sexuality and things, and we even turn to each other in the movie questioning some of the intentions of the characters, and there were some things around sexuality and relationship that were literally a kiss or just touched on and then never referred to again.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether they needed to explore that more, because it kind of left me a bit confused and empty.
Yeah, so the lesbian subtext I think you're referring to between Shug and Celie, it is in Spielberg's movie, and it's played down a lot in Spielberg's movie, and that was a criticism of the 1985 film. But obviously, being a product of the time, it wasn't something that they could overtly do back then.
Yeah, fair enough.
They could, however, have done it here.
Yeah.
They've leaned into it a little bit more than they did in the 1985 film, but still haven't gone there. So I hear what you're saying.
And it makes sense. Time and place, 1985. I understand that. I'm curious to see or to learn how it's explored in the novel. But yeah, this day and age, you would think that they would freely explore that a bit more, because I found that quite interesting. But they moved on from it so quickly, and I felt there was a gap in the character.
But I guess also it's a sign of the times of the book and where it's set, that maybe it was just alluded to, you know what I mean, in Celie's life. Maybe she couldn't fully go there. Maybe they didn't fully go there. We do see a lot more of it in a fantastical, imaginative sense in Celie's mind.
Beautifully so.
And that's something I want to talk about with this film, especially with the cinematography and all that kind of thing. It beautifully explores this world in this magical realism kind of way.
Yeah.
And you get to see Celie's inner journey, which you wouldn't normally see on the Broadway show, or maybe not even in the movie. Obviously fantastic acting from Whoopi Goldberg as Celie back then. She could act it away, but we actually get to jump into Celie's mind in this one and see things unfold.
It really taps into her imagination, right? Because she is so oppressed. She has been subject to decades of abuse, like you mentioned before. She is contained to those four walls. Her eyes have not been open to the world, and especially with the disconnect with her sister, Nettie, she longs for what the outside world could offer, because she believes her sister is still alive, but she doesn't know that. And so with the medium of musical, it allows you to enter her desires, her feelings, her imagination. And one particular scene, there are many, but the set piece with the gramophone and the bath is just so big and bold, and it just goes there, and it seems a lot, but it works so much. It's so astonishing how they translate a feeling and a moment in the story into the medium of a big set piece. The movie does it again and again, and it's just amazing.
Yeah, it's that visual quality to Celie's inner journey,
Yes.
just putting you right in it. And just on Shug and Celie's relationship a little bit more, I actually found it really inspiring, lesbian subtext aside. These situations where women should be pitted against each other by society or men, but this sisterhood prevails throughout. And I just found that so heartwarming and inspiring to watch.
And it was so moving because it was unique to the Black experience at the time, right? Because women across history have always been oppressed, and they don't often, wrongly, obviously, feel like they have a voice and they're not heard. So it was really amazing and inspiring, like you said, to see women lift each other up and empower each other, yet demonstrate empathy that we're not all the same, but that persistence and that sisterhood is always there. It's that red thread through this movie, and it's just gorgeous.
Another major theme running through this film is religion, obviously, and that's such an integral part of this community. I did feel that they lay on the religion and the emotion a little thick just before the end of the third act. It starts to jar you out of it a little bit, because up until that point I wasn't really aware of it. It felt so natural and so believable, and I was completely in that world and believing these characters are real. And then it got towards the end and it started to get a little bit long and things started to drag out, and then they really, really went into this religion side of things, and the tone of it shifted just a little bit.
Yeah.
It's mostly hope, obviously. That's the point where the film starts to really lift up. And I was in floods of tears along with everyone else in a lot of the third act. So I loved it and I enjoyed it, but it did start to lay on a little thick for me.
I want to talk about the pace of the movie because, as you mentioned before, the passage of time is quite a lot, many decades, from I think 1909 to 1945, if I wrote that down correctly. And I felt that there were really big gaps where you're just kind of jumping in the timeline that were a little jarring. Some of the passage of time and those transitions were done with utter perfection, but then I found there were gaps in the film, which is quite extraordinary given the film is so long.
Yeah.
It felt rushed at times. So that's just a bit of a criticism where I felt left of center here and there sometimes in how they chose to progress the story. And I wanted to live in some of those periods of time that we literally just move on from. Like at one point, it was like a whole decade. And I thought, hold on a minute. I really want to live those years with the characters, but we weren't given the opportunity to.
Yeah, I didn't realize until sometime after that so long had passed. But those transitions that you talk about that are used to show the passage of time or go from fantasy to reality and back again for that matter are so damn creative.
Yes, aren't they?
I was so excited every time that happened, and that just speaks to the creativity of Blitz Bazawule.
Yes.
And his visual eye and just gorgeous.
Yeah, as a multimedia artist, I've worked on Black is King with Beyonce, like you mentioned at the top of the episode. It encourages that creativity, just taking risks and doing something different visually in the medium of movies, but then throw the fact that it is a musical as well. It invites the audience to come on a bit of a different journey in how that story can be told. And more often than not, they absolutely nailed it. So I agree with you there.
Like there's one transition in particular that I thought was just, oh, wow, like it's a bit in your face, but there's a picture of Shug Avery on the bedside table and it goes into the image.
Oh, yes.
And she's posing and she's doing that. But then it's like she's on a train and she starts moving a little bit and she can't quite keep her footing under her. And then it transitions back to the picture and you find that Celie's being abused by her husband or her partner or whatever.
Yeah.
That kind of transition, it's just very creative to connect those dots.
It shows incredible discernment and preparation and planning and storyboarding as well, just when you think about the creative elements and how all the different departments come together. A vision of a director in order to pull those off needs to be clear, apparent, and communicated to its team. So that's why I think they were so successful throughout the film.
It's interesting to note that this film was produced by Oprah Winfrey, Scott Sanders, who worked on the musical, and Quincy Jones. And the original for Quincy was his first film foray into film producing. And then, of course, Steven Spielberg, the director of the original, they're all on board as producers. So you know you've got integrity behind the filmmaking team and that it's going to honour the original. It's going to honour the story.
There's so much experience in the back end of this film. You've listed all these names, but what is really beautiful and poetic is all those players, a lot of it was their first, right? You said Quincy Jones, his first foray into producing film. Steven Spielberg cites The Color Purple as his first quote-unquote serious movie after making a lot of summer blockbusters like Jaws and Indiana Jones films. So The Color Purple was instrumental in the direction of his career. It probably influenced him going off and making Schindler's List some 7-8 years later. And Oprah Winfrey and Whoopi Goldberg being introduced to us in the film. So it's amazing to see that they still have that attachment and connection to the story and that they're involved in a much more senior way to share this story with new modern audiences. I just really like that bookend to this story. I love it.
We talked a little bit about the soundtrack and the Broadway songs that have been brought in. I also want to talk about the choreography from Fatima Robinson, who absolutely nailed it. Like, the choreography is out of control on this film. My eyes were popping out of my head. My head was bobbing up and down. Just the choreography combined with the music was completely engrossing.
And in situ, in the main streets of the town, by the swamp or in that space, that barn where they have the club, you know, within the store with the fabric and everything, like, it's just a celebration. How these performers can move, it's just amazing. It's just this kinetic energy with the music, like you said. It's just one of the highlights of this film is just how movement is brought into the story so well.
Another highlight is the locations. And it's amazing to note that all of them were existing places.
That's amazing.
Which is incredible because they're absolutely stunning. I mean, some of the locations they chose for the iconic numbers, like there's a scene in a waterfall, a musical number near a waterfall. I can't remember the name of it, with Celie singing about her children and knowing they're alive.
Oh, yes.
And that waterfall is absolutely incredible. Gorgeous. I want to visit there immediately.
Leigh loves waterfalls. Who
Loves
doesn't?
a waterfall. The costuming as well. Let's talk about the costuming. Francine Jameson Tanchuk, who actually supervised the women's costumes on the original, did an amazing job. The colours are brighter than you would expect for this time period. There's some pastel hues that really feed into that magical realism and the fantastical aspects. But the detailing and the period authenticity is absolutely superb.
And the challenge of showing multiple decades as well. So starting in 1909 and then representing the passage of time through what characters are wearing and how they're wearing it, but then also layering it with the expectation of musicals just heighten reality a little bit. So it was extraordinary work. And I love that piece that she worked on the original film. Again, this is a gorgeous poetic bookend of people that were involved at the inception and then again give the opportunity to tell this story in a new way.
It just gives it an authentic quality that feeds through the film and really touches people who have seen it before. And actually it's really funny that Oprah Winfrey, there's a quote in the press pack that Oprah Winfrey says, "This isn't your mama's Color Purple."
Yeah.
But your mama will enjoy it too.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Another technical marvel that I constantly was celebrating while watching the movie was the lighting, the director of photography from Dan Lustan, and how that marries in with production designer Paul Denham Osterberry. The lighting streaming through the cracks in the sides of buildings and the shadows. It was just a beautiful marriage between what camera and lighting and production design can do when it's so cohesive and heightened slightly because you have musical numbers taking place in these spaces. It was so warm. It often felt very warm.
And also so practical because it's shot on actual locations rather than recreated in a soundstage.
Which you can't duplicate from an audience to feel something real and lived in. So I'm so glad that they did that. And this movie, visually, you simply can't fault it.
We have to talk about the casting, the performances. We've waited too long in the episode to talk about this. It should have been right at the beginning because Fantasia Barrino bow down to the Queen. She's starring in her feature film debut, reprising her role as Celie from Broadway.
Yeah.
Barrino actually won the 3rd season of American Idol, if people don't know who she is. So she easily has the chops for this kind of role. And lo and behold, she has the acting talent to back it up too.
The journey we go on with Celia through Fantasia's performance is like the accolades that she is receiving right now throughout the award season is so warranted. My heart ached for her so much. You have to explore empathy for her. She delivers such an honest, gentle, but then really powerful performance later in the film. Yet she's still so soft around the edges. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's just the perfect balance of tone. And my gosh, you want her to succeed and get through all this harrowing life that she's experienced. It's such a beautiful performance.
And she's so believable as being downtrodden, and then also can transition into this, not glamorous, I would say, but you believe prettied up confidence, inner glow that comes from Celie.
Yes.
This could have been Cynthia Erivo in this role, actually. I think people were campaigning for it because she was in the Broadway production as well as Celie, but it's absolutely the right choice, getting someone with an unproven film record, because you can completely lose yourself in her performance rather than recognizing her, you know?
That's so true. And do you know what? Physically, she was quite unrecognizable because I do know Fantasia, and I remember her winning American Idol all those years ago in those early days when it was the biggest show on earth. Like, I knew she was in the movie, but there was something about her portrayal of Celie was so stripped back that I forgot I was watching Fantasia. I really did. So testament to her ability. And her feature film debut, wow.
Yeah, absolutely outstanding. We also have Danielle Brooks, who has played Sophia on stage before too. So she knows this character inside out. And man, does she own it.
Yeah.
But she gets to bring a different performance here, because obviously on stage you have to give 110% too. But on film you can really get those nuances and you can bring something different to the performance, and she just knocked it out of the park.
She is fierce, she is assured, she's confident, and my God, she's funny in this movie. Every time she came on, I was like, yes, we've got this.
Yeah.
But my gosh, when she has to be vulnerable, when she is knocked down into the dirt, and that nuance, that performance, her ability to portray that, like you said, is so devastating. And I didn't think I could laugh so much and cry so much over one singular performance.
Yeah.
She is astonishing.
Really astonishing. We've got Taraji P. Henson, of course, as the sultry Shug Avery, who rolls into town all glamour and fun. And isn't that just Henson? Like, she's a larger than life personality. You just have to listen to her recent interviews and round tables talking about how she fired her whole team after Empire because they didn't capitalize on it and get her all the opportunities that she deserved. You know, there's no messing with this woman whatsoever. But in this role, she brings this incredible vulnerable quality to Shug Avery that is so beautiful to watch. Just hiding beneath the surface of that confident exterior. It's absolutely outstanding, and it just shows why she's one of the most incredible talents that we have working today.
I loved every time she came on screen, and for some reason I thought she was going to be much more of a smaller character, so I was pleasantly surprised at how much she was in this movie and her own journey through her yearning for love and acceptance of her father. She was such an enigma. She had so much influence and everyone fell over her. But like you said, she's dealing with so much of herself. You think on the surface that she knows exactly who she is, but she does long for acceptance like all of us. And that was a really beautiful layer to her performance.
And to also play that level of, you know, she's a mistress. She goes and stays with her lover, whose wife is there, also taking care of her. Like, it's so wild. Yeah, it's so strange. But she has nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
So she's kind of forced to go there, and then builds this beautiful relationship and friendship with Celie as a result that shouldn't happen. Like, logically, they shouldn't go together. But the two of them play it so beautifully that you can see them discovering the kindred spirit within each other, and just building on that. And I loved their chemistry on screen.
It was. That's a word that we haven't used until now. There's so much incredible chemistry in this film, and it's not used in the traditional way that there's chemistry between a man and a woman.
Yeah, not like romantic or sexual. It's
a chemistry between sisters.
Beautiful sisterhood, absolutely.
Speaking of sisterhood, we have to talk about Halle Bailey's performance as Nettie, as a young Nettie, because when you're talking about chemistry and building a connection so early on in the film, that is the driving force for Celie to keep her head above water, is one day seeing her sister again. Halle Bailey just delivered a really sweet and powerful performance in such a short amount of time. And she's so new in her career, and I'm just so excited to see where she's headed because she has a lot to give.
Do you know she actually wrote a song for the film as well, Keep It Moving?
Oh.
Which is the one that the sisters sing together. And that song is basically the backbone of what Celie remembers from her sister, the lesson she learns, which is to just keep going. It's the thing that just keeps her getting through day by day, no matter what life throws at her. And Jesus, life throws a lot at her.
Doesn't it just?
Yeah.
My God. It's awful to think back at what she endured, but my God, how she survived is just, women are so powerful. They are.
Coleman Domingo, though, is starring as Mr., which is the role that Danny Glover had in the original. They've zoomed in on Mr. with more of a redemption arc in this one. And I don't know how that will sit with people generally.
Yeah, it didn't sit well with me.
Right.
How did it sit at all with you?
Look, Domingo is an outstanding actor and he brings such a depth to this character that I guess wasn't really there in the original. But I personally feel he's an irredeemable shit of a character.
I agree. He's a cruel, cruel man.
Yeah.
Like, he is a wounded soul, but it's irredeemable.
Yeah, and like he's been hurt, and yes, hurt people, but that's not a reason to do it. And I feel like they gave him this sort of redemption arc that, I mean, yeah, he does some nice things to try and avoid this curse that Celie puts in him. And he does like an amazing thing for her, a very pivotal thing for her that I don't want to reveal towards the end of the film. But I feel like they make too much of that.
Right.
Like, hey, he's a nice guy now.
My interpretation of that is this, whether or not it plays out as such in the film, and I think audiences, your responsibility to make a decision as to how you feel about the character of Mr. That's up to you completely. Did he receive a redemption? I interpret it as he thinks he is redeemed. That's my interpretation. I don't think he's redeemed. I don't think that played out particularly well, but I'm at peace with the fact that he thinks he's redeemed and he's living a better life and he made better choices and did some good in the end. That's what I'm taking away from it.
Okay, fair enough. There's a nice little nod to the original to see Whoopi Goldberg in a cameo too.
Oh, yes. I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, it was nice to see her. You give a little cheer like, yay.
Yeah, that was nice.
But I just want to take a minute before we move on to celebrate the ensemble cast because they were out of this world. And it's always the case when you see a musical, the ensemble cast hold it together. They are the glue that drives a musical. And it's no different in this film because they're all nameless, faceless, dancing people. But without them, the songs don't have that momentum. They don't have that power. They're holding the backbone of the film.
I couldn't agree more. It's such a great opportunity to celebrate an ensemble cast in a musical, in a movie, and in this case, in a movie musical. So, yeah, champion the little guys, yeah?
Yeah. Well, Tim, let's wrap up our review of The Colour Purple for our listener.
The Colour Purple is a deeply moving cinematic experience. It translates the energy of a Broadway production and the complexity, vitality, importance of Black stories to screen with conviction. The performances are told with such honesty and truth, it's impossible to walk out not feeling something deeply profound. However, as we talked about, the pacing of the film and its choice to imply some key character and plot elements leaves it a little bit uneven in parts for me. Despite this, a film very worth seeing on the big screen for the spectacle and celebration of Black stories. I'm going to rate The Colour Purple 4 popcorn kernels.
It's a great wrap up, Tim. Blitz Bazawule's The Colour Purple is less about trauma than it is about joy. It's light without shying away from the heavy. It's heavy, but not so heavy that you can't see hope. And hope is at the heart of the original story. It's a little on the long side, and I feel the emotion gets laid on a little thick at the end, but it is emotional, it's joyous, it's entertaining, it's inspiring, and you just have to look at the reaction of the audience in the screening that we went to, and people were in floods of tears in the third act.
Sobbing.
Someone next to us was actually sobbing.
Yeah. Gosh.
And that just goes to speak to the importance of telling these Black stories and celebrating Black community. It's so important. I'm going to give The Colour Purple 4.5 popcorn kernels out of 5.
Gorgeous. I love it. The impact of this story is far-reaching. And The Colour Purple is in Australian cinemas from January 25.
And obviously, we recommend that you go and see it.
Highly, highly so. As always, friends, thank you so much for listening.
We'll catch you next time.
We have a website, popcornpodcast.com. Make sure you check it out. We've got all our episodes up there for you.
If you'd like to get to know us a little better, there's an About Us section and we run ticket giveaways. So keep an eye on the website for more information.